All right, let's not pretend this whole situation makes perfect sense, because it doesn't. The deeper you look into this war, now dragging into its 6th week, the more it starts to feel like one of those decisions that was rushed, emotionally driven, and honestly, kind of reckless. And yeah, I said it, reckless. Everybody's been talking about that explosive report from the New York Times, and if you've even skimmed through it, you already know why people are scratching their heads. The big question is simple. What exactly pushed Donald Trump to go all in on Iran like this? Because from the outside, it doesn't look like a slow, calculated build-up. It feels more like a moment where someone said, we can win this quickly, and that was enough.
Almost at the 6-week point. I want to bring in former Home Affairs Secretary Mike Pezzullo. Mike, by now, half the world, I hope, would have read that New York Times article. People have been scratching their heads, wondering what the trigger point was for Donald Trump to launch these strikes on Iran and get into this war. It was a fascinating read, this New York Times article. You could go to so many points of it, but what was your take out about Benjamin Netanyahu convincing Donald Trump that this could be a quick war, that the Strait of Hormuz wasn't a problem, but also how Donald Trump viewed his allies?
Good morning, Laura. It was certainly a gripping read and a foretaste of the book from which it's sourced. Apparently, the two journalists, Swan and Haberman, are going to be publishing a book shortly, which will...
Before we continue, do us a little favour by subscribing to the channel, because over 98% of you watching haven't subscribed. It costs you nothing, not even a penny, to join this channel. Have you subscribed? Thanks so much.
And here's where things get really interesting and a bit uncomfortable. A lot of fingers are pointing towards Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the level of influence he had in shaping this decision. The narrative being painted is that this war was sold as something swift, clean and decisive. A quick strike, a fast collapse of leadership, minimal complications. But come on, when has anything in the Middle East ever stayed quick and clean? The idea that the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically sensitive waterways on the planet, wouldn't become a massive issue, that alone should have raised alarms. We're talking about a choke point for global oil traffic, and somehow the assumption was that it wouldn't spiral into a bigger problem. That's not just optimistic, that's dangerously naive. And sure enough, here we are, weeks into the conflict, and what do we see?
It would seem
congestion,
about the contribution
tension,
that allies
uncertainty
might be able or willing to make. Now, we spoke a few weeks ago about the paradox. Trump doesn't trust his allies to support, but he doesn't reach out to them, so they then are in a position of saying, well, you didn't consult us, so what is it? You know, we can't read your mind. We don't know what it is that you want us to do, and now we're sort of scrambling to retrofit some operations. So it's a really graphic telling of the detail of what I suspect we all intuitively understood to be the case a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it was just such a stunning read. It felt like carelessness. That's the word that really came to mind, where Benjamin Netanyahu was so convincing in getting Donald Trump to be involved, where it seemed like his vice president and all of his own advisors were far more cautious, but he did it anyway. I want to pick up this issue about allies. He's been very critical, the UK, NATO, but singling out Australia many times. This is one of those times he did that.
Here's the part that really gets me. Apparently, there was little to no serious consideration of how allies could have played a role before things escalated. Let that sink in. No proper coalition building, no coordinated strategy with long-time partners, no serious attempt to secure the strait early on with a unified force. That's a huge miss. Because if you're going to step into something this big, you don't go in alone. Not when you've spent decades building alliances for exactly these kinds of situations. Instead, what we're seeing now is countries scrambling after the fact, trying to piece together some form of support. That's backwards. And this leads us to one of the most bizarre parts of this whole story, Trump's growing list of complaints about allies who didn't help. Let's talk about that. He's been calling out countries left and right, NATO members, Asian allies, and yes, even Australia. And honestly, that's where things start to feel a bit unfair, because how do you criticise partners for not showing up when you never clearly asked them to in the first place? That's like throwing a party, not sending invites, and then getting mad nobody came. Australia in particular seems to have been singled out more than once, and you can almost sense the frustration behind it. But when you actually look at what different countries have done, it's not like they've been completely absent. There have been logistical supports, access to bases, refuelling arrangements. These are not small contributions. Australia even deployed surveillance assets, although with some limitations. But still, to act like allies just sat back and did nothing, that feels more like venting than a fair assessment. And if we're being real, this grievance list looks less like a strategic evaluation and more like a reflection of frustration. It's almost as if Trump wanted a coalition without actually doing the groundwork to build one. Now, let's zoom out a bit, because this is where it gets even serious. The Middle East situation is one thing, but the bigger picture, that's China. And this is where Australia suddenly becomes incredibly important again. See, while it's easy to throw criticism around in the heat of the moment, the reality is that Australia plays a crucial role in any potential future conflict in the Pacific. We're talking about positioning, logistics, military cooperation, the whole package. If tensions with China escalate, the US is going to need strong, reliable partners in that region, and Australia is right at the centre of that strategy. So here's the irony. While it might feel good in the moment to call out allies for not doing enough, the long-term reality is you can't afford to push them away, especially not when you might need them even more in the near future. Imagine this scenario for a second. Tensions with China continue to rise, military preparations ramp up, and suddenly those same allies you criticised are the ones you need to rely on for access, support, and coordination. That's not a position you want to be in. Because relationships matter in geopolitics. Trust matters. And once that trust starts to crack, it's not easy to rebuild, especially under pressure. And let's be honest here, this whole situation could have been handled better, a lot better. There should have been more planning, more consultation, more effort to bring allies into the fold early on. Because when you're dealing with something as complex and high stakes as a war with Iran, you don't just wing it and hope for the best. You build a strategy, you build a coalition, you think 3 steps ahead. Right now, it feels like we're watching the consequences of skipping some of those steps. Now, don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean everything is falling apart or that disaster is guaranteed. There's still time for cooler heads to prevail, for strategies to adjust, and for alliances to strengthen again. But the warning signs are there. And if this year feels intense, there's a growing sense that what's coming next could be even bigger. Not necessarily inevitable, but definitely possible. So yeah, this isn't just about one war or one decision. It's about how decisions like this ripple outward, affecting relationships, strategies, and global stability in ways that aren't always obvious at first. And that's why conversations like this matter. Anyway, I want to hear from you. Do you think this war was rushed? Do you believe allies were treated fairly in all of this? And what do you make of Australia being called out like this? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious to see where people stand on this. If you made it this far, you already know. You're part of the real ones. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and stick around because we're going to keep breaking these stories down in a way that actually makes sense. Because let's face it, the headlines only tell you half the story.